and welcome back to another video tutorial. I'm Atenas and this is Mode Bespoke. For today we're going to be crocheting the Boho Cardi. So let's get started. So here is our cardigan, and let's just talk about construction really quickly because it's really easy to put this cardigan together. So what you're going to need are going to be two panels. So it's going to be two rectangular panels. Now if you see, I can't look right here, we've got, this is how wide the panel is. So we'll talk about the measurements here in a moment, but it's not a very wide panel, but it's really, really long. So it's just one long rectangle, because if you look up here, this is the shoulder part of the sweater. We didn't sew anything. It's just one continuous rectangle that we fold in half, and that will make up just the panel of your sweater. So you're going to need two of those. So I did one colorful so it has a bit of a boho look, and then the other one in just a light gray, but you can choose to make these however you want. And then the sleeves, we're just going to build right from the sweater. So we're going to cast on right on the sweater, and then we're going to work our way down to give the sleeve the length. At the end, we will add our cuffs, and then we'll add the trim, and then there's trim here at the bottom, and the pockets, which are optional. So it's really, really easy to put together. Now let's move on to the measurements you're going to need, and we'll start crocheting. So let's talk about the measurements you're going to need, and this is taken directly from the written pattern. So if you would like the written pattern, I'm going to link it down in the description box below. It is available on my website. This is directly from that pattern. So the measurements you're going to need to take, and then this is a completely customizable sweater, so you can make it extra small, you can make it XL, 3XL, whatever size you need, because it's going to be based on your body measurements. So you're going to need to take the width of your shoulders. So start on one shoulder and measure all the way across to the other shoulder. You're also going to need your shoulder to hip length. So you're going to start in front, wherever it is you want the length of your cardigan to end. So if you want a really long cardigan, you can start lower. If you want a shorter one, you can start up higher. Start wherever you want the cardigan to go. You're going to measure all the way up and over and around your shoulder. So if you're standing like this, you want your cardigan to start here. You're going to start with the measuring tape here, and then you're going to bring it all the way around and over your shoulder, and then measure to the other end where you want your cardigan to end. So that is this shoulder to hip length. You're going to need the wrist cuff measurement, and then you're going to need your sleeve length. Now for the sleeves, there are two ways you can do it. You're going to see one way here on the video, but the other way is for a sleeve that's a normal long sleeve that goes all the way down. You're going to want to measure from the top of your shoulder. You want to bend your elbow just like you see here in the image, and then you're going to measure all the way down to your wrist. Now the way I'm going to show you here in the tutorial, I like my sleeves a little bit shorter, so my sleeve goes to about here. So what I did is I just put my arm out and then measured it. So instead of bending my arm, I just held it out like this and then measured it. But I prefer a shorter sleeve because I always pull them up. So choice is up to you. If you want a traditional sleeve, measure it this way. If not, then just continue watching the tutorial and you'll see the way I did it for a shorter sleeve. But this is the chart from the pattern. These are the measurements you're going to need. So here they are just for a moment so you can write that down. And the shoulder width, so this measurement right here, it's going to be the width for your panel. So for this shoulder panel, let me back up a bit. So this is my shoulder width right here, and this is just for one panel. You're going to need two panels. This is a really wide cardigan. At the end of the video, we'll talk about the adjustments you can make to this pattern so that you can make it a little more form-fitting if you want it. So, but that's going to be at the end of the video. So here's the information about the yarn so that you can kind of figure out how much yarn you're going to need for your cardigan. So my shoulder measurement, the one that I used, was 15 inches, which is 38 centimeters. So remember that you do need two panels. So, but that was my shoulder measurement. I used a total of 1,840 yards of yarn, or 1,688 meters. So that was total. The breakdown of the yarn, so that colorful boho stripe that you see, that was the Madala yarn, and that's by Lion Brand. The color is Chimera, and it was just one skein, and one skein is 590 yards or 540 meters. So that was that one. The rest of the yarn was the Bernat Baby Big Ball, and I only got one skein in gray. So those are really large skeins. Both of them are a size 3 yarn. Now for the rest of the materials, you're going to need a 4mm Tunisian crochet hook, and then you're going to need a pair of scissors, yarn or tapestry needle, measuring tape, and some stitch markers and or safety pins. So let's start with that shoulder panel, and the stitch we're going to be using is the Tunisian moss stitch. Now for this one, I'm just going to do a quick review, so I'm going to move pretty quickly. If you need a step-by-step tutorial for this specific stitch, I'm going to link it right up here. So we did this a couple of tutorials ago, so go check that out. It is a step-by-step, just really slow description of how to do this stitch. But to move through this a little bit quickly, we're just going to start with a slip knot. And the chain is going to be that shoulder measurement. So for me it was 15 inches, so I need to chain 15 inches. And you're going to do this in an odd number of stitches. So I'm just going to start. I'm going to do a small sample here. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. So in odd numbers, this is going to have to be the length of your shoulders. So make this chain whatever measurement you need. Mine would have been 15 inches, but use whatever measurement you needed. And we're going to begin here on this second chain from the hook. So skip the first one, and on the second one, you're going to begin to cast on. So just insert your hook into the stitch, yarn over, and pull the hook out so you can cast on. Again, if you need to see this stitch a little more slowly, go check out that tutorial. I think it's like 15 minutes long, but we go over this stitch really, really slowly. So once you've cast on, we're going to work a regular return pass. So for that, we yarn over, pull through 1, and then yarn over, pull through 2 for the rest of the row. So yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, until we finish this return pass. There, I got stuck. Okay. So now that we've finished our foundation row, we're going to go into the second stitch from the hook. So we're always going to skip this first one because you've already got it here on your hook. So skip the very first stitch and always begin on the second one. This is a 2-row repeat for this stitch. So the first row we're going to do, you're going to work a knit stitch into this first stitch. So just insert your hook and crochet a knit stitch. The next one, I call it a yarn over stitch. So what you're going to do is you're going to skip this stitch, but you need to yarn over, skip the next stitch, go into the one after it. You're going to knit stitch in that stitch right after that. So there we go. So here's the stitch we skipped. We did a yarn over, and then we just go into the next one. So we're just going to skip every other stitch. So we're going to do yarn over, skip, and then knit stitch in the one after that. So yarn over, skip, knit stitch in this one. Yarn over, skip, knit stitch. And then you just knit stitch in that last stitch of your row. And once you've cast on, complete a regular return pass. And then for our second row of our 2-row repeat, you're going to notice our first stitch is just a vertical stitch, and then we have this next stitch, which is an open, just upside down V. So let me pull this a little bit so you can see it. So these little stitches, I'm going to call these open stitches, just to make it easier to explain. So you're always going to skip the vertical stitch. You're going to work into that open stitch. So in every open stitch, you work a knit stitch. So since our first stitch is a vertical stitch, we're just going to yarn over, skip, and we're going to knit stitch in that open stitch. yarn over, skip, knit stitch, yarn over, skip, knit stitch. So just continue here till we get to this last stitch, which is a knit. So it's one of the stitches that we're going to skip. So it's a vertical stitch. So we're just going to yarn over and we're going to knit stitch in that last stitch of the row. There we go. We've cast on. Now you just complete a regular return pass. So I'll do one more row with you guys just so you can get that little extra practice. But those were the 2 rows you're going to repeat over and over. So let's do one more here. So this first stitch is going to be an open stitch. So here you're going to knit stitch. The next one's a vertical. So yarn over, skip, and then knit stitch in the open stitch. So yarn over, skip, knit stitch in the open stitch. Continue this way until you get to the end. So the end, the last stitch here on this one is going to be an open stitch. So you're going to knit stitch in that open stitch. So we're going to yarn over here, skip, knit stitch in here. And then you're going to knit stitch in that last stitch of the row. So don't forget this very last stitch. There we go. Then you just complete a return pass. So you just repeat those 2 rows over and over until you complete the length. So that's going to be that shoulder to hip length. So continue repeating this. Once you are through, you are going to need a bind off row. So make sure you have a little bit of yarn left so we can complete a bind off. Now our bind off is going to be worked in single crochets. So we're going to single crochet into every one of the stitches here of this row. So whether it is a vertical stitch or an open stitch, you're going to single crochet into each of those. So here's my first stitch of the row. So for my small sample, it is a vertical stitch. It may be an open stitch on yours, but go into that first stitch right there and single crochet. I'm going to go into the next stitch and single crochet. So notice that I'm inserting my hook as if I were crocheting a knit stitch. So just through the stitch all the way to the back, yarn over, pull up a loop, and then you close your single crochet by making a yarn over, and then you're going to pull this yarn over through both stitches. So insert your hook, yarn over, pull through 2. So we'll just continue working these last few stitches, and don't skip that last stitch of the row. So remember to crochet a last single crochet in that last stitch, which is this one right here. So that one. That also gets a single crochet. And then you just chain 1 at the end. And that chain 1 is going to make just a nice little knot down here. And you're just going to cut your yarn, pull your hook out and your yarn, and you'll be done. So there you go. So that's what your bind off will look like once you finish it. There you go. And now you repeat this same stitch for that second panel. So don't forget to make a second panel that same length. So remember the number of chains that you made. So if you have the written pattern, there's a space where you can write down the number of chains you crocheted initially. Do the same thing on that second panel, and then if you want to count number of rows, you can write that down as well. I didn't make a space for it on the pattern since I was just using measurements, so I just measured it as I went. But make 2 panels the same width and the same length. And then I'll show you how to put those together, and then we'll start moving on to the sleeve. All right, so now moving on to our sleeves. So we want to determine the placement of the sleeves now that we have both of these panels completed. The easiest way I have found to do this is to just complete both of the panels that you need for your cardigan, and then you're just going to line them up. So this is going to be the back of our cardigan, so make sure if you're going to be completing a colored panel, place the colors that you want on the back, and you're going to line up both sides of both panels of the back of the cardigan. Now just grab some stitch markers, safety pins, whatever you have handy, and we're going to close up this back part. So just make sure you line up the bottom so that the edges are nice and clean. And then you're just going to place a couple of these pins around here. It doesn't have to be perfect. We're not sewing anything closed yet. We're just determining where we want our sleeves to go. So this is just the easiest way I have found to do this next part. Because now, see, you'll have just the one piece instead of being two separate panels. You've already kind of have the foundation set up for your cardigan, and you'll be able to try it on, and then we can place the stitch markers for our sleeve. So what it's going to look like, so this is what we're trying to do here. I'm going to line this up. So once we've determined where we want our sleeves to go, we'll be able to build out the sleeve. So we'll have our stitch markers ready to go, and we'll be able to just start our Tunisian crochet going out and create our sleeve. So now that we have it all pinned up, I'll show you how to place your stitch markers so that you know where it is that you want your sleeve to go. For this next part, we're going to try on the cardigan because we're going to measure the sleeves. So put your cardigan on, and then here's the back. So this is where we've pinned. So this is the back part. Make sure that your colors are in the order that you want them to be in. And you're going to try it on. Line up the neck where you want it to go. And then the most important part here is to line up the panels in the front and the back. So make sure that they're lined up so that they end evenly and not so that you have one side longer than the other. You want them both to be completely even, and you want this to happen on both sides. So make sure both sides are nice and even. And now, once you've got that done, you're going to pull your arm up so that it is running perpendicular to your body. So once you have this set up, you're going to need 2 safety pins, 2 stitch markers, anything. You're going to need 2 of these. What you're going to do is you're just going to line up your edges, and you're going to pinch where you want your sleeve to end. So I want my sleeve to be about that big, and then try it out. Move your arm around, make sure it's comfortable, make sure your ends are still lined up. And once you've decided where you want your sleeve to end, how big you want your sleeve to be, you can make it tighter if you prefer a more narrow sleeve. I want this to be a little bit more loose and a little more comfy, so I'm just going to leave a big sleeve. You're going to grab your stitch markers, and you're going to place one on each panel, on each side of the panel really, on the front and the back. Like that. So you have 2 stitch markers, and it tells you where your sleeve is going to go. So you only need to do this on one panel. We're going to use this panel to measure this other side so that they're both even. But once you've measured out your panel, we can go ahead and take this off and start measuring out our sleeve. So now that we figured out where we want the sleeve hole to be, we need to measure how long we want this sleeve. So just keep your arm extended out and then grab a measuring tape. This part is a little easier if you have help. If you can't, this is how I did it. So just hold your measuring tape. You're going to measure from the end of the little vest, so because this is still a vest for the time being, so measure where the stitch ends all the way to where you want it to go. So you are going to add an elastic at the end, so make sure you leave about 1 inch just additional. So measure from the end here, it's a little long, so from where this ends to where you want your sleeve to go. Again, you're going to add an extra inch to it, so stop 1 inch approximately before you want the sleeve to end. Once you've got that measurement, write it down, and we're ready to crochet the sleeve. So now to build the sleeve, this part is quite easy. So let's get started here. We've already have our 2 stitch markers that tell us where we want our sleeve to go. So our sleeve is going to be in this part. We have to cast on, I'm just going to grab my yarn, grab your hook, and we're going to cast on into this first stitch where our stitch marker is. So just insert your hook into that stitch. You zoom in a little bit so you can see better. And you're going to grab your yarn, leave a nice long tail. We're going to loop it around our hook, and we're going to pull this top loop through the stitch. So there's our first one. So we have cast on 1. Pull this yarn out of the way. I find it easier to just hold with my other fingers so that I can pull on this and it won't pull out, but do whatever you need to. All right, So now we're going to cast on 1 stitch for every stitch here along the side. So here's a stitch, here's a stitch, here's a stitch. So go into the next stitch, insert your hook into the stitch, yarn over, and pull up a loop. So we've cast on another one. Go into the next stitch, so insert your hook into the stitch, yarn over, and pull up a loop. There we go. Insert your hook into the next stitch, yarn over, and pull up a loop. So we're just going to cast on 1 stitch for every stitch of this row, and by row I mean up to this next stitch marker. So this is where your row ends, because this is how wide we want our sleeve to be. So just cast on one stitch on your hook for every stitch up until you get to this stitch marker, and then you're going to complete a return pass. It's just a regular return pass, so it's going to be your yarn over, pull through 1, and then yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, until you have 1 loop left on your hook. So cast on, complete a return pass, and I'll see you when we begin our next row. So once you've already cast on and you've done your first return pass, you've already got your foundation row, we're ready to begin the stitching. Now the stitching on the sleeve is exactly the same as the stitching for the panels that we did. So we're going to start our first row exactly the same way as we started this other part. So we're going to knit stitch in the first stitch, yarn over, skip a stitch, and then knit stitch. Yarn over, skip, knit stitch. Yarn over, skip, knit stitch, until you get to the end of the row. Now here, your work might be a little bit different than mine, because we may not have the same number of stitches, which is okay. You just have to complete the row the same way as you've completed all these other rows. So just pay attention to your last stitch, and you'll be able to complete the row just fine. So for my last stitch, so here's my knit stitch, and then I'm at the end of the row. So I did my knit stitch, and then I complete my last stitch. We're good to go. If your last stitch, if you ended on yarn over and then you have that last stitch because you have to skip one, then just do that. So yarn over and then complete your last stitch, and you're good to go. That's it. So just complete the row with whatever stitch it is that follows the sequence. So whatever your next stitch was supposed to be, complete your row that way. So I have, let's see, yarn over, skip, and then knit, and then I have my final stitch. Okay, so we're at our return pass. This is going to be a regular return pass. So our foundation row was return pass number 1. This one is going to be return pass number 2. On return pass number 3, we're going to work our decreases. So let me grab my sleeve here so I can show you. So the decreases, what they're going to do is they're going to close up our work a little, so that our sleeve looks like this. So it's going to have a bit of a trapezoid shape. So it's going to go in towards the, it's going to close up, there we go, towards your hand, so that your sleeve is a little more fitted, and so it's not just one giant square. So that way when we close the sleeve and we sew it shut, it's going to look a little bit more like a traditional sleeve. So wider here on where your body's at, and then narrower as you reach your hand. So that's the look we kind of wanted to have. If you're a little intimidated by the decreases, you can just skip it and just make one large square. So it'll just be the square the size that you wanted it. So that measurement we took a little earlier today from the shoulder to the hand, that's how long you want this piece to be. So if you're a little intimidated and you don't want to do the decreases, that's okay. Just make one giant square, and then we can work on the ribbing for the sleeve cuff in a little while. But for all of us that want to work on the decrease, here's what we're going to do. Let me complete one more row. So I'm going to complete this return pass. Like I said, this is return pass number 2. We're going to work a decrease on every 3rd row. So rows 3, 6, 9, 12, etc. That's where you're going to have a decrease on your return pass. So this is only row number 2. So let me complete this row. I'll cast on row number 3, and then I'll show you how to do the decrease. All right, so once you are on that third return pass for your decrease, you're going to yarn over and we're going to pull through 2. So there's 1, 2, and then yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, until you are left with 3 loops on your hook. There we go. So once you have your 3 loops, you're going to yarn over and pull through all 3. And that was a decrease return pass. So now, since we've decreased on this return pass, we're going to have to skip the first stitch. So you normally skip this first one already. We're going to skip the first one in our sequence. So it's going to be this open stitch. So the one we normally knit stitch in, we're going to skip that. Here is our yarn over stitch, and then we're going to work into the next knit stitch. So we've skipped the first one, which is a knit stitch. You're going to yarn over, go into that second knit stitch. So skip the vertical one, which is our yarn over stitch, and go into the knit stitch. And then continue the rest of the row. We're going to do the same here at the end. Since we did do a decrease, we have to skip this last stitch. But let me cast these on real quick so I can show you what that will look like. And yours might look a little bit different than mine. So it'll end in one of 2 ways. So the first one is here, the same way that mine ended, which is a yarn over stitch, and then I have a knit stitch, and then the end of the row. So what I would do is I do my yarn over, my second to last stitch. So here's the last stitch of the row. The stitch right before that, the second to last stitch, is a knit stitch. You're going to skip that. So it doesn't matter what stitch it is, skip the second to last stitch. And I'm going to work directly into the last stitch of the row. And there we go. I'm ready to go. Now I work a regular return pass. So that would be return pass number 1 of the 3. So 1. So yarn over, pull through 1, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, all the way until I finish my return pass. So if the last stitches of your row, if the very last one that you have is a yarn over stitch, so let's pretend that that knit stitch isn't here. So we have a yarn over stitch and then it's the last stitch of the row. You're going to skip the yarn over. So don't yarn over and go directly into the last stitch of the row. And then complete your return pass. So whatever that second to last stitch is, skip it. So skip that, work the last stitch of the row, and then complete your return pass. Go and here. So I'll complete my the 2 next rows. So it's this return pass, I'll cast on again, complete 1 more return pass, and then cast on my 3rd time, and I'll show you a decrease 1 more time. Okay, so I have already cast on row number 6. So I left you at row number 3. So I had already cast on row number 4. Now we're on row number 6. And now we have to work a decrease return pass. So we're going to yarn over, pull through 2, and then yarn over through 2, yarn over through 2, until we have 3 loops left on our hook. And once we have our 3 loops left, we're going to yarn over and pull through all 3 loops. So we're going to skip the very first stitch. So here I have a yarn over stitch. We're going to skip that, and we're going to work directly into the next stitch. So knit stitch, and then yarn over, insert my hook in the next one, yarn over, insert my hook in the next one. And once we get to the end, we're going to skip the second to last stitch. I have a knit stitch as my second to last stitch, so I'm just going to yarn over for this one, skip my knit stitch, and work directly into that last stitch of the row. There we go. And I just complete a regular return pass. So that is return pass for row number 7. So my next decrease will be on return pass number 9. So cast on row number 9, and then you do a decrease return pass, and then you continue the sequence on every 3rd row. So every 3rd row you do a decrease return pass. So complete as many rows as you need to reach the length that you wanted for your sleeve. So here's my sleeve. Oh, we're looking at it in the back. There we go. So I just kept repeating until I completed. I wanted my sleeve to be about 12 inches. So I just completed a length of 12 inches for my sleeve. And then we'll start working on the cuffs. So complete both of your sleeves because you have both of them. So complete both sleeves, and then I'll show you how to make the cuffs. So we're going to need 2 cuffs for the sleeves, and then we're going to need another one for the neck. So it's going to line around the front of our cardigan, so along the sides and back through the back of the neck, all the way around to the other side. So we'll complete these next. First, complete both of your sleeves, and then we'll move on to that part. Okay, so now for the cuffs, these are really, really easy, and these are the same, unless you want your cuffs to be a little bit wider. This cuff is just about 1 inch wide. So for this one, we're just going to start with a slip knot, and we're going to chain 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now all this is just 1 row of purl. So here this is the first row. So we're going to cast on and do your foundation row, and then you're going to do a row of purl, row of knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, until you complete the length that you want. Now for the length, take your measuring tape, which I can't find mine, here it is, and just wrap that around your wrist, or wherever it is you wanted your sleeve to end. So wrap that around, measure where it ends. So I need my my cuff to be about 6 inches. So that's how long you're going to crochet this, so that it matches the length that you want around your wrist. You can also just crochet a few rows and then measure it as you go, just to make sure that it's comfortable. So continuing here, we've chained 5. So now we have to work our foundation row. So we're going to go into the second stitch from our hook, and we're just going to start to cast on. So we're going to cast on 4 stitches, and then we have 5, which is the first one here. So we have cast on 4, but we have 5 stitches on our hook. And now you're just going to yarn over, pull through 1, yarn over, pull through 2, 2, 2, and then 2. And we begin a purl row. So yarn over in the front, reverse yarn over, insert your hook into the stitch, release the yarn, regular yarn over, and pull through. So if I moved a little bit fast on this, I do have the beginner stitch. I'll link the video up here on top of the video, right up there. I'll link the beginner video where I show you how to do this really, really slowly, and it's an in-depth description. So go check that out if you don't know how to do this stitch. This is a Tunisian purl. So reverse yarn over, insert your hook into the stitch, pull your yarn in front and then behind your hook. So over and behind, regular yarn over, and close your stitch. So just continue to purl stitch in every stitch of the row, including this last one. Complete a return pass. And now this next row is going to be a knit stitch. So we're just going to knit stitch into this second stitch of the row right here. So always skip the first one. Knit stitch, knit stitch, knit stitch, and then knit stitch in this last stitch. Go. So we have all of our stitches, and then you just complete a return pass. So there we go. We did a row of purl and then a row of knit. The next row is a row of purl stitch. So just complete a purl stitch in every stitch of the row, and then complete a return pass. And then we're going to do a row of knit stitch. So just continue repeating row of purl, row of knit, row of purl until you've completed the length that you want. Once you've done that, make sure you cut your yarn, weave in your ends, and then repeat on the second one. For the bind off on this row, so let me complete, oh, here we go. The last row you're going to work on is going to be a row of purl stitches. So once you reach the length that you want, complete a row of purl stitch, and then we're going to do a bind off, and it's just going to be a single crochet bind off. So starting on the second stitch, we're going to insert our hook like we would if you were going to complete a knit stitch. So insert your hook in between both threads, all the way to the back, yarn over and pull up a loop. You're going to have 2 loops on your hook. So you're going to yarn over and pull through both loops. Now go to the next one. Insert your hook into the stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, and then single crochet. Insert your hook, yarn over, pull up a loop, single crochet. And then on this last stitch, you're going to do the same. So insert your hook into the stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, and single crochet. So that is your bind off. Now you just chain 1, cut your yarn, weave in ends, and then repeat for a second cuff. You're going to do the same thing for the big cuff that goes around the neck, only that one's going to be a lot longer. So let me show you how to measure for that, and then you're going to repeat the same thing, but let me grab my cardigan and then I'll show you how to do that. To measure the length of the trim that you're going to need for this cardigan, you're going to divide your sweater into thirds. So lay it out flat in front of you so that the back of the cardigan is at the bottom and the top or the front is going to be at the top part. So the blue where the teal is up at the top, that is the front of my cardigan. So there you divide the sleeve into thirds. The bottom third, which is down here where you're going to see the yellow arrow, that's going to be the bottom third. That's where you're going to measure to in order to get the trim size that we need for the cardigan. So we're going to start by placing our measuring tape in the front right hand corner of the cardigan. So right where you see that yellow arrow, and you're going to pull your measuring tape all the way down to that back third. So right where you see the arrow again, you're going to fold your measuring tape at that point and then pull it up on the other side to the front left hand corner of the cardigan. So when you look at your measuring tape as it is laying there on the flat cardigan, you're going to notice that it's in the shape of a U. That's going to be the measurement you need for your trim. So that's going to be the length of the front trim. So once all of your parts are completed, we can start sewing everything together. So the parts that you're going to need to finish are going to be the 2 panels. They're going to need the sleeves, so a sleeve on each of the panels. You're going to need the 2 cuffs for your wrists, and then you're going to need the long elastic, which is it's going to be the border that's going to go around your neck along the front side of our cardigan. So once you have all of these pieces ready to go, we can start sewing it together. Now let's move on to sewing our sleeves. So once you have completed both sleeves and both cuffs, you're going to go through and weave in any of the ends that you have. That's going to make sewing everything a lot easier. And you're going to lay your work flat in front of you so that you're looking at the outside of your cardigan. So if you're not quite sure what you're looking at, just pick it up. Your seam should look kind of like this. So this is going to be the seam that you're going to see on the outside. Here's the seam as you'll see it on the inside of the cardigan. So we want to lay it flat in front of us, like so, with the outside seam right up on top. And then you're going to lay your cuff right along the top of your sleeve. Now you're going to notice that your cuff is a little more narrow and you're going to have a bit of sleeve on either side. That's because this cuff is stretchy. That's why we measured around our wrist. So here, just so you can see that it does fit. So that's the size I want for it. And when we pin it, we're going to stretch the cuff a little bit. That's going to bring it in just a bit once it is sewed up so that it fits comfortably. So grab some safety pins or some stitch markers, and we're going to use those to pin the cuff along the edges of our sleeve. So pick a corner that you want to start on and just start pinning it down. So I'm just going to grab a pin, and then as I'm pinning, I'm going to pull on the cuff just to stretch it as we go. Like I said, it is quite stretchy, so it should stretch just enough so that you can pin it down on your sleeve. So here, I'll pin a few more with you. There's that. Let's do another one. And just continue to pin everything down. Once it's all pinned down, we're going to go ahead and sew it all up. So pin this one down and then pin the sleeve or pin the cuff on the other sleeve so you have them both ready to go. Then we'll start to sew everything. If your cuff is pinned, we are ready to start sewing. So just grab your yarn and tapestry needle, whatever one you prefer. And I'm using the same yarn to sew with. So just cut a nice long length. You're going to make a little knot at one end, like so, and we're ready to start sewing. This is going to be the same stitch I'm going to use throughout the entire project. So I'll show it to you once. You can use any stitch that you want, but this is just to show you how I'm going to sew this on. So I'm going to line up the two edges here. Let me zoom in so you can see a little better. And I'm just going to give this a small stitch here on the corner. So it's going to be the end of the cuff and the end of the sleeve. So do 1 or 2 stitches here just to make sure that this isn't going to pop open. And then let me remove this stitch marker so you can all see a little bit better. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to line up the edges. So here's the sleeve and the cuff. Line everything up as best as you can, and I'm just going to sew from one direction to the other. So I'm going to go from right to left. You can go left to right if you're left-handed. And then I'm going to stitch in the opposite direction. So now I'll go left to right. And make sure you're grabbing both sides so that you're grabbing both the sleeve and the cuff, because the goal here is to join them together. So make sure you're grabbing both sides here as you're sewing. So here, pop that in the wrong side. There we go. Let me get this stitch marker out of the way, and I'll show you a couple more stitches. So again, I'm going to go from one side to the other. So now I'm going from right to left, and then I'm going to stitch from left to right. So make sure you don't go too far into the sleeve or too far into the cuff. So it's just maybe one stitch in on either side. But that's really a really simple stitch. That's the one I'm going to be using throughout the entire project. So anytime I tell you to sew something, this is exactly how I sewed it. So I'm just going to keep sewing the cuff onto the sleeve. I'll do the same for the second cuff, and then we can move on to the next part. So here's what the sleeve looks like once I've already sewn the cuff onto it. So the cuff, as you can see, is still quite stretchy, but that's ready to go. So you're going to want to sew the second cuff onto the other sleeve, and now you're going to want to sew the back together. So lay your work out completely flat, and then I'm going to lay it the same way I did when I was measuring the sleeves, only this time we're going to divide the sleeve in half. So instead of dividing it in thirds, divide it in half, and you're going to, from right where that arrow is pointing, so that center stitch right in between both panels, you're going to begin your first stitch there and then just stitch all the way down along the back side of the cardigan. That way you will sew both panels together and create one back piece. So it will no longer be two separate panels, but just one whole back piece. So get that stitched together, and then we'll move on to the rest of the project. Once you have sewn the back part together, see, it's going to be one solid piece. You're just going to lay this flat again. So here it is. And we need to sew all of the sides together. So I found that it's easiest if you just fold it in half this way. So line up your sleeves. So there you go. So here's the armhole. Just line up the bottom part, fold your sleeves in half, and then you're going to lay your work out flat. So the front of my cardigan, as you can see, is right here. It's what we're looking at. So the teal side is the front part. Once you lay it all flat, you're going to begin to sew from the cuff of the sleeve. So begin on the cuff and go all the way down the sleeve and down the side. You're going to do the same thing on the other side. So begin at the cuff, and then you're going to sew all along the bottom. So begin here, cuff the sleeve, sew all along the bottom of the sleeve, and then all the way along the side of your cardigan. Once you are done with all of that, then we can go ahead and add the trim at the front. So here's the trim. And for this, I'm just going to line it up here. So just like how we sewed the cuff together, if it's easier for you to pin this, go ahead and pin it down. But I'm just going to lay it flat here, and then I'll sew it off camera. But line it up where you want it to go. So here, line this middle part too, because you're going to sew all the way down to that bottom stitch right in the center. Right along there. And then there you go. So just go through and sew that front trim onto your cardigan, and then we can move on to the pockets and the bottom trim. So the pocket and this bottom trim, these are both optional. They are included in the written pattern, so you will see those there, but these are worked in single crochets. So the rest of our pattern is all Tunisian. These two parts are in single crochet, so it's just regular crochet. Now you can use a regular hook, or you can just use your Tunisian crochet hook, whichever you feel most comfortable with. But for the pocket, we're going to start with a chain of 26 stitches. So it's going to be 26 stitches across and 30 rows. So once you've made your chain, I just made a really small one here, but if you need a quick review, so you're going to chain 26, you're going to work into the second stitch from your hook, and you're going to work a single crochet in every stitch. So for the single crochet, you insert your hook into the stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, and you're going to yarn over and pull through both of these loops. So just yarn over, pull through both. And we'll repeat it. Insert your hook into the stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, and then yarn over, pull through both of those loops. But that's it. So you're just going to single crochet in every stitch of the row, so you'll have 25 single crochets. And then you're going to chain one, turn your work around, and you're going to begin on this very first stitch of the row. You're just going to begin again with another single crochet. So single crochet here and in every stitch of the row. Again, you should have 25 single crochets. So once you have crocheted a total of 30 rows, you're going to chain one at the very end, and that'll make a nice little knot. And you're going to leave a long thread. You're going to use this tail end to sew your pocket onto your cardigan. So leave a nice long tail. So I left quite a bit because you have to go around 3 sides of the pocket. So leave a long tail, cut it there, and then pull your hook out along with the thread, and you're ready to begin. Make sure you weave in this tiny end right here. So weave that in. If you don't know how, I'll link a video up here to show you how to weave in your ends. Make sure you weave that through, and then you go through and sew your pocket onto your cardigan. If you're watching TV or you're doing something and you're a little distracted, make sure that you are paying attention and you don't sew this top part closed. So just sew along the 2 sides and the bottom. Now for this bottom trim, this one's also just a series of single crochets. So you're just going to start, so here it's going to look like this. So the edge of your crochet. So begin on any of the sides that you want, but find that corner stitch, insert your hook into that first stitch, pull up a loop, and then just start to single crochet in every stitch along the bottom of your cardigan, all the way around. So work a row of single crochets, just keep going, going, going to get to the other end. Let's get to the other end, chain one, turn your work around, and then work in the other direction. So then work around this way. I did a total of 5 rows. So this border here, or this trim, that's 5 rows. I wanted this to match the width of the front trim. So that's why I went with 5. You will have some yarn left over. So if you're using the same measurement as me at least, you'll have some yarn left over. So you could probably do a couple more rows, but I just wanted this to match this. Once you're done with that, just cut your yarn, weave in all your ends, and you're done. So let's talk about adjustments and just sizing it so that it's a bit more form-fitting. This is a really wide cardigan, so it's just a really loose fit. It's really comfy, but for a more form-fitting cardigan, if you remember the panel size, we used the shoulder measurement. So for me, it was the 15-inch measurement, so the width of my panel was 15 inches. Then the width of this second panel was also 15 inches. So my cardigan is now twice the width of my shoulders, so that it fits nice and loose. If you want it smaller, then use half of that shoulder measurement. So for my 15 inches, it would have been 7.5. Round to the next nearest inch or centimeter. Don't use a ½ inch or a ½ centimeter. Just go right into the next number. So instead of 7.5, I would work with 8 inches. So my panel is, this panel would be 8 inches, this panel would be 8 inches. So that the width of my completed cardigan would be my shoulder width. And then since it's open, it's not going to be incredibly tight. So if you just use your shoulder width divided in half for each panel, it'll fit you very comfortably and it'll be a lot more form-fitting. Now, for the sleeves, so that they're not really wide, when you measure your arm, so this is my arm, right? So my shoulder's up here, here's my arm. Instead of leaving that extra space, just put it as close to your armpit as you want, and that'll make a much smaller armhole. And then when you do your decreases, you just work every third row, you work a decrease return pass. But that's it. Those are really all the adjustments that you need to make. It's a really forgiving stitch, so as you go crocheting along, it's just really easy to make any adjustments that you need. But if you have any questions while you're working on this, feel free to just leave it down here in the comments, or just write me an email. My email address is down in the description box. So just reach out. I'm happy to help you complete this pattern. But that's it.
So that was our video tutorial for today. I hope you have enjoyed it. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. I post videos every week. Go check out my Instagram page. You're going to see tons of projects that we're going to be working on here on the channel, as well as all the other projects that we have done in the past. If you've enjoyed this video tutorial, don't forget to like and share it, because I love it when you guys do that. So thank you very much for watching. I'll see you all in the next tutorial.